Far away, in the distant kingdom of the Fairlands, lies the Pale Forest, a never-ending landscape of trees and foliage filled with life that roams the forest in harmony and tranquility. A place of worship and rest for those villagers close by and other mysterious peoples that call the Pale Forest home. You enter this ancient, magnificent forest slowly. The trees of the Pale Forest were of oak, birch and maple. A distinctive trait these trees had were a pale white hue within the bark of these trees. In turn, this gave the forest a misty glow in the morning sun and an ominous feeling at twilight. The peoples of the Pale Forest were reclusive and wary of foreigners, even if they were a part of a village just outside the tree line. These people were seen as wild and were given the name of the Pale Walkers, for they were deep in the thick parts of the Pale Forest. They kept to themselves for the most part, however, communicated with the many druids that lived in the Pale Thicket next to the sacred groves that were seen as centers of spiritual connectivity. The Fairlandian subjects don't know how long these peoples lived in the forest. However, their tenacity and survivability within the dangerous parts of the forest indicates that they were there longer than the establishment of the Fairlandian kingdom. The Pale Walkers were not violent or intrusive. They made hardly any noise or even dabbled in affairs besides their own. No, they kept within the forest, for the forest was their home, and the outside was not to their liking. The Pale Forest was home to many creatures, including deer, rabbits, foxes, wolves, bears, and many other mythical creatures such as wood spirits, fairies, and gnomes. Many which can be seen frolicking in the groves and traveling high above in the trees. Poaching was forbidden within the tribes of the Pale Walkers, and they seek to protect their forest from outside forces that would indeed mean harm to those who lived in it. And they were not alone in protecting this forest as well. The wood spirits would often cast illusions on outsiders, leading them out of the forest. Fairies would often be a nuisance and steal supplies or arrows from hunters to encourage them to turn back, often seeing it as a bad omen to stay. The gnomes, on the other hand, would be their spies, often hiding in the most secret of places and letting the other forest folk know the whereabouts of unwelcome guests. The Pale Forest in its entirety can be a place of solitude and beauty. However, it can also be a forest of dread and horror. Many parts of the forest have never been explored, or at least tales of those parts have not been discussed after setting foot there. The Pale Walkers, even living in the deep parts of the forest, know their boundaries. For if there is great light in the world, there is great evil that lurks below it. Nevertheless, the Pale Forest, to many, is home. On a normal day in the Pale Forest, you would hear the birds singing in the morning, for the forest gives plenty for them to eat. Much of the land is untouched. Through the several millennia, everything has fallen into place. The Pale Forest often gets rain, so the foliage of the forest is lush, with an emerald pale green. The sun beamed through the holes of the massive stretch of leaves and branches, and many of the untamed roads have spots of sunlight. Most of the trees are large and have plenty of sprouting branches and roots. The wood spirits would carve ocarinas out of the pale bark and would often play when the forest got a nice rainstorm. Some say that the songs of the forest can be heard through the wind and waterways, and if they are heard, that they are safe to travel through this magnificent forest. There are also many mossy stumps laying around the Pale Forest. Often they were cut by the Pale Walkers to create a resting spot for their legs. The Pale Forest spans for miles on end, and in time, the Pale Walkers have created sophisticated trails that can be spotted by the trained eye. Many have stated that these mossy stumps are a sort of signpost, a crossroads, if you will. They say that the mossy side leads to the nearest village. There were many creeks within the Pale Forest, so fresh water was plentiful if one knew where to look. The water was crystal clear and had a light blue hue to its color. It was cold as ice, since much of the fresh water came from the mountain nearby. The river of Alu ran rapidly into the forest and spread like fire, creating pockets of fresh drink. Often it was told by the Pale Walkers that if you listen closely to some of the rivers in the deeper end of the forest, that you can hear the calls of the river spirits. They often tried to lull unwelcome guests to sleep so they may fall into the creek and be awoken drenched in water. The river spirits often played pranks or messed with the heads of unwelcome guests. In turn, most know not to stay too long or too close to the flowing creeks within the Pale Forest. It is not exactly known how many gods and goddesses the Pale Walkers believe in within the forest. However, on nights where the fog flows between the tree trunks, you may see in the fields a group of dancing priestesses. They dance within the fog while chanting an ancient Fairlandian language. The fog will twist and turn around them, being surrounded by an unworldly presence. If you are caught in the fog, it is said that you will fall into a trance and live a lifetime in a span of minutes. The priestesses are known to be very wise women who often help their fellow kin become closer to the divinity. The priestesses are known to do 4 dances in their lifetime, for they would have lived 4 times over. One dance signifies being in touch with one pillar of the divinity, and the spirit within the fog guides them in turn. Once the dance ceases, they sit and ponder within the fog until it fully dissipates and moves throughout the rest of the forest. The sounds of their chants follow the fog and could be heard within the Pale Forest. The Pale Walkers have a sacred rite they commence whenever a young man or woman matures enough to become a vital member of their tribe. This rite only occurs on stormy nights below a full moon. It is said that the energy from the moon blesses the rain and in turn blesses the new member of the tribe with strength, fertility, and tenacity. They are first stripped of their clothes and painted in white paint from the sap of the great white oak. They are then guided by the druids and priestesses along with the tribe to a sacred area in the deep part of the Pale Forest. Above the young participants, their mother and father hold over a very large leaf to cover their white paint as they traverse to the sacred grounds. Many of the fellow tribesmen play drums, shakers, and blow the horn of awakening. As they arrive at the sacred ground, they lift off the cover of the leaves and let the rain wash away the paint, signifying that they are reborn as a vital member of their tribe. The druids and priestesses would chant in ancient Fairlandian, and the young men and women would encounter in their mind the great white oak spirit. The moment is often over, barring, and many become unconscious for a time being. However, those who do not are seen as otherworldly and are mentored by the druids and priestesses, often becoming one themselves. On nights where no festivities or rituals are occurring, the Pale Walkers enjoy playing the harp for those who have trouble sleeping. There is an old tale among the elders of their tribes of a great white stag named Sepho. Many see Sepho not as a god, but as a good omen for those who spot him. He is large in scale, almost 16 feet tall, long legs, and built mighty and strong. The eyes black as night, and antlers that can pierce the walls of the greatest of fortresses. One story goes that a young man was playing the harp to his village in the forest late at night, and the moment he stopped strumming, he heard a large thump behind him. Although he did not see much but crickets and foxes, he set to investigate the sound he heard. The young man entered a large brush into a clearing and saw Sepho sleeping to the tune of his harp. The great stag then opened his eyes to see the young man and stood up majestically and bestowed upon him a patch of white hair and trekked back into the forest slowly and in an instant vanished. The young man used Sepho's hair as strings for his harp and learned that his harp never fell out of tune, and the sound was so pure and full that he renamed it the Harp of Sephos. Even to this day, whoever plays the harp often falls asleep themselves. If on some nights the harp is not being played, you can find the younger of the Pale Walkers glancing up at the enormous starry night, becoming enchanted by the lights of shooting stars and the enlarged planets. The sounds of the crickets could be heard as if the forest itself is breathing in the night. The slight gusts of wind amongst the trees of the forest. A veil of mysticism falls upon those who dare stay up at night. The shadows begin to dance. The voices of those who are gone can be heard again. Often the spirits of the forest can be seen walking amongst the untamed roads and smiling creatures, and be heard giggling and playing with one another. The Pale Forest at night can be a dangerous place, but it can also be a place of total salvation, where the material world and the other worlds collide and intermingle in one's affairs. Often the Pale Forest protects those who fall asleep within the pale thicket and graces the sleeper with the most magnificent dreams of swirling lights and pleasant music that creates bliss within their souls. Their dreams are full of loved ones and those they desire the most, often waking up feeling fully refreshed and happy. Deep in the forest, there is a sacred grove that only the druids know where to go and find it, for the trail can only be seen by those who have the knowledge. The grove is smaller than most, but it is the most ancient. There are several small totems made of stone that are sprinkled along the grove, and it is said that these totems were created by the divinity themselves when they were awoken to this world. A low, reverberating tone can be heard against these totems if one puts their ear close enough to it. The energy from the divinity could still be felt on these totems, for they vibrate on days of the solstices. The druids will come together and converse amongst each other on worldly affairs, often trading different signs and knowledge. They have all learned to better equip the peoples of the Fairlands for what is to come. After they have discussed this, they would chant together to bless the gods and to bless the land around them. They would bang on their drums and shake their bone instruments until the gods would give them a sign. Often the sun or moon would fade and the ritual would be complete. Afterwards, the druids would move deeper into the forest to the most sacred of places, where the great white oak grows, the oldest tree in all of the known world. The great white oak has a presence in itself, almost as if it watches you. A force can be felt once in sight of it, for it knows where all things are, for it feels where all things move. The great white oak's spirit moves within the forest at a moment's pace and helps all who treat the forest with respect, and destroys anything that disrupts the order of his domain. It often talks to those who sit below its massive tree branches, inquiring and asking questions within their minds. Although it could be a scary encounter, the great white oak is like speaking to a wise grandpa. often trying to lead them to a more prosperous life. It is said that the roots of the great oak touch all roots of the pale forest. Only the druids know of its location, and until time ends, will stay that way. Although the pale forest brings life to the world, all things must come to an end. Once a member of the Pale Walkers passes on to the next world, the tribe has a wake to help the soul of their fellow kin move on to the next world. The body is given a spear, a piece of bark from the great white oak, and a lit candle. They do this to help the soul move through the pale forest at night and can find the divinity in the process. The tribesmen would play one final tune for the lost soul to let them know that they are not alive anymore and to encourage them to move on to the next life. It is a sad occasion, but all know that in time we must all have that journey into the next life. Their kin aid as much as they can, for they would want the same treatment. Although there is much more to explore in the Pale Forest, you find yourself on a trail leading to the forest's border. Perhaps you found this path on your own, or perhaps the Pale Forest casted another trick on another traveler.